Good afternoon. This is Dr. Aparna. I am your emotional healing synergist. I am an Ayurvedic psychotherapist, a passionate infopreneur, medical writer, and now a budding YouTuber. Today's context of discussion is autism spectrum disorder. So I had an infinite number of requests, asking me to discuss what is autism spectrum disorder, because this is very complex, and people wanted it to be simplified. So here, by the way, I am on my pursuit to address, promote, and propagate Ayurveda and psychotherapy globally. So in this discourse, I come up with discussions every week on Ayurveda, mental health, psychotherapy, and self-help books related to mental health. I have done 4 book reviews as well. You can check out in the LinkedIn and YouTube as well. So coming to autism spectrum disorder, as you can see, this is mostly a pediatric developed disorder. So let's understand what is autism spectrum disorder. So autism spectrum disorder is a complex neurodevelopmental condition, you know characterized by challenges in social interaction, communication, and behavior. So it is called spectrum disorder because it encompasses a wide range of symptoms. Spectrum is a wide range of symptoms and levels of functioning. So autism may vary from mild to severe. Each individual with autism spectrum disorder is unique, and their experiences can differ greatly. So this is a complex neurodevelopmental condition. What does it mean that it is a complex? So children, having autism spectrum disorder have challenges in social interaction, communication, and behavior. So what happens is autism affects how people interact with others, communicate, learn, and behave. Although autism can be diagnosed at any age, it is described as a developmental disorder because symptoms generally appear in the first 2 years of life. So, in the first 2 years of a child's life, that is in the age of while they are toddlers only, or infants or toddlers, you can assess the symptoms, signs and symptoms. So these generally appear in the first 2 years of life, but it might be diagnosed, may not be diagnosed in the first 2 years or the initial years of their life. It might be diagnosed at different ages, at any age. But in after the infancy, in between 1 to 2 years of age is the first when parents notice this developmental disorder, that is autism. So medically, what see we diagnose autism when it they in a children have difficulty with communication and interaction with other people. So they have restricted interests and repetitive behaviors. We'll discuss about the repetitive behaviors in the session itself. So symptoms that affect their ability to function, to work, and other areas of life, maybe some sensory and motor developments. There may be developmental delay or developmental disorder in these children. So autism, as I said, is known as a spectrum disorder because there is a wide variation and type of severity of symptoms. So there are many types of autism. So how see how does it in social communication and interaction, what happens is, when I say there are challenges in social communication and interaction, this includes challenges in social emotional reciprocity. That means, such as they cannot make eye contact, or there is difficulty in maintaining conversations and forming relationships. So it may also involve non-verbal communication difficulties and limited understanding of social cues. So it is difficult for autistic children to understand the social cues. So I will give a example of that in the discussion. So restricted and repetitive patterns of behavior, interests or activities. So what happens is, behaviors like repetitive movements or repetitive speech or strict adherence to routines, intense focus on specific interests, and sensory sensitivities or aversions. These behaviors are a bit different from normal children. So you will get to know the repetitive behaviors as the child or the toddler is growing up, so in the early developmental period. So the symptoms in the early developmental period are, these symptoms must be present in early childhood. So how does the people are always have many questions about autism, because this is the most common disorder, and many most of you might heard of the word autism. See, the autistic brain functions differently compared to the neurotypical brains. So um there is a wide range of individual differences among people with autism spectrum disorder, that is ASD. Some general characteristics have been observed in the way their brains process information. So what happens in the brains, in the autistic brains, is atypical connectivity. That means research suggests that individuals with ASD may have altered patterns of neural connectivity. So in the brain, this is that what happens in the brain, we are discussing the not discussing the symptoms, what happens in the brain. So there are altered patterns in the neural connectivity. That means the way the way different parts of the brain communicate and work together may be different from those without ASD. So the different parts of the communication between the different parts of the brain, and they work together in, usually the brain, the different parts of brain work together to bring sensory and motor outputs. So here in autistic brains it is different, and there is a difference in sensory processing differences. So sensory processing differences means here, many individuals with autistic spectrum disorder experience differences in sensory processing. They may be hypersensitive. That means they might be over responsive, or hypo responsive, that is under responsive. It might be they may be over responsive to certain situations, or they may be under responsive to certain situations, to sensory stimuli like touch, sound, light. Sometimes if the light falls on the child may react hypersensitively, and that means oversensitively, it reacts hypersensitively. Or sometimes the reaction we expect may be very hyposensitive, that is under responsive. So detail focused processing. So in some individuals with autistic spectrum disorder tend to focus intensely on specific details or patterns, sometimes at the expense of processing broader contextual information. So uh, when we talk of disadvantages, there is a specific advantage in the in people having, in children having autism. That means they have, for certain things or for specific details or specific patterns, some of the processing, they process the there will be broader contextual information, that is high, they have heightened attention to detail. That means many famous personalities, belonging to art and music, and some activists as well, so they are diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. If you just google and see, you can find many well known people having autism spectrum disorder leading a good life, because it has helped them in their art as well. So they have detail focused processing, something called focused processing in autistic individuals. So they have very much attention to detail in the specific details or specific patterns. And here, this is the advantage. And here next is difficulty with social cues. So the social difficulties often associated with autism spectrum disorder may arise from challenges in processing and interpreting non-verbal cues like facial expression. They cannot interpret, or there is difficulty to interpret social, facial expressions, body language, tone of the language. What happens is this can make it harder for them to understand and respond appropriately in social situations. They it In autistic children, it is difficult for them to respond to appropriately respond to the social situations. That means if somebody is, the tone of the voice is higher, and somebody is scolding, I mean, if the parents are scolding the child in the higher tone, or talking to them with a higher tone, or some of the autistic children, they cannot understand that social cue. So likewise, there are many other examples. So, strengths in the pattern recognition. Some individuals with autistic disorder excel in tasks that involve pattern recognition, logical reasoning, and structured thinking. As I said, there are disadvantages to having autism, there are strengths as well. So wherein, they are, they excel in the tasks wherein a logical reasoning or a structured thinking is required. So this can be an area of strength, particularly in certain academic or professional domains. So it is not that when a child has autism, that means the child is not academically good, that academically or professionally he can't excel. Of course he can, in certain, pattern recognition. When it comes to logical reasoning and structured thinking, these kids perform extremely well. And about the repetitive behaviors and interests, many individuals with ASD engage in repetitive behaviors. Those repetitive behaviors, we call it as stimming, which can include actions like hand flapping. See, hand flapping, rocking, or repeating certain phrases. They tend to repeat certain phrases, inappropriately, it not appropriate to that social environment. They can have some hand flappings or rocking, or they can repeat certain words and sentences sometimes. So these behaviors, may serve a regulatory or self-soothing functions. What happens is they do that because to self-soothe themselves. It becomes a habitual thing for them. So, and next is executive functions, which include abilities like planning, organizing, initiating, and inhibiting actions, may be affected in individuals with autistic spectrum disorder. That means if they have to plan or organize or initiate something, there are difficulties, and there are difficulties in their daily functioning, in planning and organizing things. So what happens is, this can influence aspects of daily functioning and adaptability. So what happens is, their daily functioning, it becomes difficult for them, for the daily functioning and adaptability, maybe planning the timetable, organizing something, their desk, they are not very good at it. So they face challenges. And enhanced perceptual abilities, that means some children with autistic spectrum disorder may have, as I said, they have high perceptual abilities, such as visual or auditory processing. This can lead to a unique way of experiencing and interacting with the world. What happens is, sometimes the memory of children with autistic spectrum disorder relating to certain things is very much higher than a normal child. This may also be the reason that an autistic disordered child, a child with an autistic disorder, may excel in, may be, excellent in academic and some professional domains. So however, it is, important, that um, these are all, what I talked about, the autistic brain is not similar to everybody. The general characteristics can vary widely among individuals with autism, and not all the traits apply evenly to, every person. And additionally, and the thing is, the strengths and the challenges also may differ, from person to person. It Everybody doesn't have all the problems, or everybody doesn't have all the strengths. So next is the causes of autism spectrum disorder. Why is it caused? See, the exact cause of autism, remains, unclear. It is not very clear. But there is a combination of, it is believed scientifically that a combination of genetic and environmental factors lead to autism spectrum disorder. That means, what are the genetic factors? There's a strong genetic component to autism. That means families with one child with autistic spectrum disorder have an increased likelihood of having another child with the condition. So, if one child or one sibling is having autism spectrum disorder, then there is a chance that, the next child may also have, it is a it is greater risk for having another child with autism. So, and specific genetic mutations or variations are associated with an increased risk, and familial thing. That means, if father or mother or any of the relatives, you know, have autism spectrum disorder, there is a chance that the children, the offsprings may have. The offsprings in the family might also develop, ASD. What are the environmental factors? These which I discussed are genetic factors. See, environmental factors also play a role. See, while genetics play a important role, environmental factors also contribute. So what are those environmental factors? Prenatal exposures. Prenatal exposures is while the mother is, pregnant mothers being exposed to certain medications or toxins, you know can also lead to autism spectrum disorder in the child. And maternal infections during pregnancy, some of the maternal infections during pregnancy, and advanced parental age may also lead to autism spectrum disorder. That means that care should be taken, prenatal antenatal care should be taken to avoid, you know um, ASD, autism spectrum disorder, in children. And what are the neurological differences? That means research suggests that individuals with autism have structural and functional differences in their brains. It is not only about how they interact or how they behave. What happens is, in their brain there are structural and functional differences from the normal brains in the autistic brain. So these differences affect how they process information and interact with the environment. So these structural and functional differences play a role when they process information and they interact with the environment. So early brain development, so what some studies suggest that disruptions in early brain development, that means particularly during prenatal and early postnatal stages, may contribute to the development of ASD. So it also depends on how the brain of the fetus is developing during the prenatal stage, and the infant or the newborn in the early postnatal stages. All this might also contribute to autism spectrum disorder. And the next thing is immune system and inflammation. That means there is an ongoing research exploring the role of immune system dysfunction and inflammation in autism spectrum disorder. So there is some immune system dysfunction and some inflammation. This is an ongoing research. They're still on the study. So some studies have found immune system irregularities in individuals with autism. So it is just that there is no single cause for autism spectrum disorder. That means, and it is likely the result of a combination of genetic and environmental influences. And additionally, while the risk factors can increase the likelihood of developing autism, they do not guarantee, and many individuals with no known risk factors have been diagnosed with the condition. So, what they are telling is, even though there are risk factors, without any risk factors as well, even though everything is right, there are children who are diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, because that the risk factors only does not guarantee the autism. There are other factors as well. So this is a complex, you can say, interplay of genetic factors, environmental factors, the brain development, everything. So the best thing is early diagnosis. If you see some symptoms, different symptoms in the milestone and whatever I'm going to discuss next, so early diagnosis and intervention can significantly improve outcomes for individuals with autism. See, autism children can also, with while it is not completely curable, but it is completely manageable. That means children with autism also can lead a very a normal life to an extent. To a larger extent, they can lead a normal life like normal other individuals. So, as I said, it is a neurodevelopmental disorder. And here early signs and detection. See, signs of autism can often be observed in early childhood. That means parents can observe this. Parents, teachers, and family members can observe in autism signs and symptoms typically by the age of 2 or 3. These signs may include challenges in social interaction, communication difficulties, and repetitive behaviors. So, if it is diagnosis in early childhood, as many children receive a formal diagnosis of autism by age 3 or 4. Although it can occur later if symptoms are less apparent or if access to healthcare services is limited. Usually autism is diagnosed within 3 to 4 years of age, because you see the symptoms starting typically after after 1 years. That means from 2 to 3 years of age. And here an important thing is autism is a lifelong condition. As I said, autism is a lifelong condition. That means the individuals continue to experience it throughout their lives. But however, the good news is with appropriate support and interventions, individuals with autism can lead fulfilling and meaningful lives. To a greater extent, they can also lead a normal life. So, what are the signs and symptoms now? What are the signs and symptoms we have to look for if you notice if your child has autism spectrum disorder? So, the autism spectrum disorder manifests usually, it is seen in a wide range of behaviors. That means its presentation can vary significantly from person to person. That means what happens is, first is social communication challenges. So what are the social and communication challenges here is difficulty with non-verbal communication. That means they don't have eye contact, or they don't express, the facial expressions or gestures are very low, or they don't know in what social what facial expression must be given to what situation. And limited use of gestures or lack of pointing to show interest or share information. Children are usually very enthusiastic, and they are very want to they are always very they have very much of curiosity, and they're interested to in pointing of things, in exploring, in knowing. But in these children there is limited of these sharing information, showing curiosity for something, such stuff, and difficulty initiating or maintaining conversations. So, and limited sharing of interests or emotions with others. They cannot express themselves really well. The children with autism spectrum disorder cannot share their interests or emotions with their loved ones as well, with their parents, with their friends, with their teachers at the school. See, what happens is, the main thing is making very little or inconsistent eye contact, appearing not to look at or listen to people who are talking. When you're talking to them, you have a sensation that they're not listening to you, or they're not looking at you. Infrequently sharing interests, emotion, or enjoyment of objects. If they're excited of something, children tend to share it very soon. So here in autistic children, they do not share that interest, that curiosity, that enjoyment, that excitement is not there, or is very less. Not responding or being slow to respond to one's name or to other verbal bids or for attention. So they are it is slow to respond to one's name or to other verbal bits. So they are slow in responding. If you ask a question, there is no immediate response. The response may be delayed or slow. Having difficulties with the back and forth of conversation. So when they are talking also, in between the conversation they have difficulties, often taking at length about a favorite subject without noticing that others are not interested, or without giving others a chance to respond. If they start talking, no, they don't give others a chance to respond. If it is their favorite subject, they don't tend to give a chance, or they don't care about whether the people are interested in listening to their conversation. So displaying social facial expressions, movements, and gestures that do not match what is being said. So what happens is, the facial expressions, the repetitive movements, what happens is, it generally does not match the situation. If they are in a sad situation, their hand flapping or moving or show, which is not situation appropriate. So having an unusual tone of voice that may sound sing song or flat and robo like. See, there is a change in their tone of voice as well at times. So having trouble understanding other person's point of view or being unable to predict or understand other people's reactions. So difficulties adjusting behaviors to social situations, that means they are not socially appropriate, in adjusting. So difficulty sharing in imaginative play or in making friends, they are very bad at making friends. Usually they remain isolated. So these are the social or communication or interaction difficulties or behaviors. So what are the repetitive behaviors here? Repetitive, so repeating certain behaviors or having unusual behaviors, such as repeating words or phrases. That means that is called, that condition we call it as echolalia. So they repeat certain phrases when it is not situation appropriate. They repeat words and phrases. So having a lasting interest in, intense interest in specific topics such as numbers, details, or facts. I said that autism, children with autism, are highly good, or they have intense interest in specific topics. I said logical thinking and all. They're very good with numbers, they're very good with details, they're very good with facts, and if they're very much interested in that topic, their memory is also very good in those topics. So, showing overly focused interest, such as with moving objects or part of objects, they can show over focused interest on some things, and they'll be totally disinterested in some other things. So, becoming upset by slight changes in a routine and having difficulty with transitions. So, they will become, as I said, they sometimes become hyper responsive, they sometimes become hypo responsive, that is over responsive and under responsive. So being more sensitive or less sensitive than other people to sensory input such as light, they may be hypo responsive to light or hyper responsive to light, sound, clothing, temperature, etc. They will have some, irritations like agitation, some agitations to particular things. So, people with autism may also experience sleep problems and irritability. So, there may be sometimes problems in sound, having sound sleep, and the children may become irritable at times. So, and they have strong attachment to routines and resistance to changes in schedules, or if there is a slight change in their schedule, they become hyper irritable. So then what are the sensory sensitivities or aversions? That means uh, there may be some, aversion or very much sensitive to sensory stimuli, such as I said light, sound, touch. If somebody touches them, or if their parents, kiss them or touch them or hug them, they may have aversion towards it, or they may be hypersensitive towards it. So, unusual responses to sensory input, such as covering ears in response to loud noises. They usually cannot handle loud noises, intense lights. This happens normally as well. But in autistic, children, it is very, very more common, frequently common. And communication difficulties is they have delayed speech or language development. Their development and their speech will be delayed. So the limited use of verbal communication or reliance on gestures or non-verbal cues, they don't talk much, they limit their verbal communication. And difficulty in understanding, in some situations they don't understand sarcasms, they don't understand metaphors. This you will know once the child starts, growing up, this will be seen. And the social challenges here is Social challenges is difficulty forming and maintaining relationships, including, friendships, lack of interest in or awareness of social cues, such as not understanding when someone is upset. People on the autism spectrum may also have many strengths. As I said, they also will have many strengths. So they are being able to learn things in detail and remember information for long periods of times. If they're interested in some subject, they go into detail of it, and their memory becomes very rich in those aspects. It is for, they store information for a remember information for a long periods of time. So they're very strong with their visual and auditory, so they are very being very strong with visual and auditory learners. Here also, all the strengths may not be applicable to every individual or every child. It is different in different children. So some children may excel in math, science, music, art. So paintings, art, music, if they are interested in something, they're deeply focused into it. So let's see one or two, practical case studies. So our first child, who is let's consider it as, Jamie. The child is 6 years old. Jamie is a 6-year old who was recently diagnosed with autism. Their parents noticed how the child was diagnosed as autism here. So Jamie had a strong sense of attachment to routines. Any deviation from their established daily schedule can lead to distress and meltdowns. She had severe meltdowns and distress and irritable to a slightest change in the daily schedule. And Jamie had limited interest in playing with other children. She was, it was difficult for her to socially bond, and often prefer being isolated and solitary activities, such as, she had a habit of arranging toys in specific patterns. And she also had delayed speech development and struggles to initiate and sustain conversation. And she had least excitement, or she did not show any curiosity, excitement as other children. So this is one of the examples of autism spectrum disorder. That means I'm telling that everything will not be seen in the same child, or the symptoms will vary in differently in different children. So our let's second child with autism spectrum disorder is age 12. This was a child, Jamie. We saw she was age 6. This is age 12. Here in this age, the symptoms may be a bit different. Let's consider this child as Minion. So Minion is a 12-year-old with high functioning autism. So what the parents observed here is, see, Minion has an intense fascination with a specific topic, that is space exploration. So here, Minion was always into, he was intensely fascinated into space exploration. They can talk extensively, he can talk extensively about planets, stars, rockets. But he struggles with conversation about other subjects. His only conversation was about, planets, stars, and rockets. So they exhibit repetitive behaviors like tapping their fingers or pacing when they are excited or anxious. So he had repetitive behaviors, tapping of the fingers and pacing. Whenever he gets excited or anxious, I said that is a soothing mechanism. The repetitive behaviors are the soothing mechanism for the child. So here Minion also experiences sensory sensitivities, and he's very sensitive to light, sound. He gets irritated and very much agitated to any music. you know in general, and prefers to wear specific types of clothing due to texture preferences. He gets irritated if the texture of the clothing differs. So what I meant in discussing these two examples were just to highlight that autism can manifest differently in different individuals. Understanding the signs and symptoms allows for early identification and intervention, which can greatly improve the quality of life and well-being for you know those people with autism. So, and it is important that we show empathy and provide support to those children that needs to be the unique needs and strength. So this is this ends the session here. I will be discussing regarding the types of autism, what is the management, what are the risk factors, everything in the next session. I hope you did get some information in this session. If you have experienced autism children in your family, or if you have any questions for me, if you want to share your opinions and thoughts, you're free to share in the comment section. Thank you for staying tuned, and namaste.